Hey guys, so in this video we're going to be learning about inverse and composite functions. We'll go through inverse first and then move on to composite. Inverse functions are functions that are opposites and undo each other. So to find the inverse of a function, you replace the x's with y's and y's with x. So if you look at the function y equals 3x plus 5, the inverse of that would be x equals 3y plus 5 because the y becomes an x and 3x becomes 3y. You replace the x's with y's and y's with x. And when you rearrange that in terms of x, you get y equals 1/3 x minus 5. Let's try f of x equals x minus 2. Find the inverse of f of x. So that equals y equals x minus 2 because f of x is essentially y. Y becomes x. You replace y with x and x with y, so x equals y minus 2. And when you rearrange that, that becomes y equals x plus 2. So first you replace f of x with y just to make things easier, and then you replace the y with x and x with y, and rearrange the new function in terms of x. Let's try an example. If we have f of x equals 4x plus 2, then find inverse of f of x. So let's replace f of x with y. So y equals 4x plus 2. Next, we replace the variables. So y becomes x equals 4y because x turns into y plus 2. And then we rearrange, so x minus 2 equals 4y. X minus 2 over 4 equals y. So the inverse of f of x is -1 equals 1 over 4 times x minus 2. If f of x equals 2x plus 3, then let's find the inverse. The inverse would be f of x just equals y equals 2x plus 3. So replace the variables. You get x equals 2y plus 3. So x minus 3 equals 2y. Half times x minus 3 equals y. So the inverse of f of x equals half times x minus 3. Now find the inverse of f of 3. So what you do is you basically just replace f inverse. You just replace 3 into inverse of f of x. So that gives you inverse of f of 3 is just half times 0, which just gives you 0. Let's try another example. Let's say we have y equals radical x minus 3, and we want to find the inverse. So we replace the variables. That gives us x equals radical y minus 3. And we want to get rid of the square root, so we square both sides. That gives us x squared equals y minus 3. X squared plus 3 equals y. So the inverse would be inverse f of x equals x squared plus 3. Next we have composite functions. We get a composite function when one function is substituted into another. So for example, if we have f of x equals 5x plus 2 and g of x equals 3x, f of g of x, in order to get that function, we would substitute 3x, g of x equals 3x into x for 5x plus 2. So that would give us 5 times 3 of x plus 2. because 3 of x essentially becomes the x that's part of the f of x function. Let's try an example. Suppose we have f of x equals 3x plus 2 and g of x equals 2x minus 1, and you want to find f of g of x. So in order to find f of g of x, we just substitute the function g of x into f of x. So that becomes 2x minus 1 would be substituted into x for f of x. So that gives us f of g of x equals 3 times the x is the x is replaced by 2x minus 1 plus 2. If we simplify that, we get f of g of x equals 6x minus 3 plus 2. F of g of x equals 6x minus 1. And let's say we want to find f of g of 5. So we know that the function f of g of x equals 6x minus 1. So we just substitute 5 for x, which gives us 6 times 5 minus 1. So f of g of 5 equals 29. Now another way we can solve this is by plugging in 5 for the function g of x, and then plugging in that answer for f of x. So let's try that. G of 5 equals 2 times 5 minus 1, so g of 5 equals 9. Since g of 5 equals 9, we can replace 9 as g of 5 into the function f. So this equals f of g of 5 because g of 5 equals 9. And when we substitute 9 into x, we get 3 times 9 plus 2. F of g of 5 equals 29. So we get the same answer both ways. Let's say we have g of x equals 3x plus 4 and f of x equals x squared plus 2. Now we want to find g of f of x, so this time f of x is on the inside. So what we do is we replace the x in g of x with x squared plus 2. So g of f of x becomes 3. The x is replaced by f of x. So f of x equals x squared plus 2. So 3 times x squared plus 2 plus 4. G of f of x equals 3x squared plus 6 plus 4. So g of f of x equals 3x squared plus 10. And that's the composite function we get. Next, we want to find g of f of 3. So again, there are two ways to do this, and I'll show both. We can first do g of f of 3 and just plug in 3 into the equation that we found. So 3 times 3 squared plus 10, and 3 times 9 plus 10. So that gives us 37. So that's the first method. Now the second method would be to find f of x, f of 3. So plug in 3 for f of x, and that gives us f of 3 equals 11. And when we substitute 11 into g of x for x, we get g of 11 equals 3 times 11 plus 4. So g of 11 equals 33 plus 4, and that gives us 37. So using both ways, we ultimately get the same answer. So thanks for watching, and if you would like more practice questions, there's homework and answer keys in the description below.